Hi. So I'm really, really glad to be here. And I want to say, so I'm the program director for Smart and Connected Health, but I'm also program director for Smart and Connected Communities. And from, as you heard in 2015, when then President Obama announced Smart and Connected Cities, it's now Smart and Connected Communities. So keep that in mind. We don't want to ignore whole parts of our country. But we started this, and one of the reasons that this whole initiative came up is because we had all these. I think that was a great example of all the technologies that we can do, but they weren't sustainable. People didn't know what was happening, and then when in my community, I'll tell you my example of my community, there was smart meters were being put in from the electric company. What's bad about a smart meter? They're great, right? I live in technology. Who wouldn't want a smart meter? Signs all over the community, no smart meters, no smart meters. I mean, community meetings, outrage. You know, they never talked to the community. They went all the way down the rabbit hole on smart meters before they involved the community. All you needed to do was involve the community and say, if we put in smart meters, what would you want? What data do you want to have? What data do you want to release? Here's the data we already get, that's not negotiable, but here's the things they could have had a ribbon cutting ceremony where people were totally excited. Instead, people were boycotting it. Okay, that's what happens when we have smart technology without the smart humans. So I think, one of the reasons we started this was how do we connect? How do we put a human in this loop? Because we can build amazing technologies, but how do we get a human in the loop? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about mobility and aging and kind of some of the work that I'm involved in. I think we've been through this, but no matter how we look at aging in the US, we are aging rapidly. I think many of us think about that daily. But we are aging, the number of young people. I was just looking at something in Japan, the number of adult diapers has now outstripped the number of children's diapers. Some of these things are really you get to the point where they're very visceral, you can understand it. And actually in 2016, under the previous administration, the PCAS, which is the Presidential Advisors on Science and Technology, put out a report on independence, technology, and connection in older age. So this really pointed at the fact that technology was not serving our older communities well. So how do we think about technology? What technology is out there? How do we think about it? And so they authorized a one-year task force, which I'm on the mobility and I'm the lead for mobility and transportation. So what we really are looking at is, we're reviewing kind of the whole range of literature around health, around cognition, around mobility and transportation, and I think there's like 9 other things. And we're really trying to figure out where do we go with technology and how do we make it work. And I'll tell you, the one thing that is, I think it's the overarching conclusion is, I sit at NSF, I have colleagues at VA, DOD, you can see everybody's on this project. And I talk about things and they look at me and say, seriously, Wendy, that exists? There's no communication. The connections between the communities are poor. They're not connected in the way they should be. I talk about a project and my friends at NIH say, really, you can do that? We were talking about something with Wi-Fi. We can do monitoring now of physical activity based on the Wi-Fi, how the Wi-Fi is moving in the room. Okay, we can do that. We can even do breathing. And the people at NIH go, really? Seriously? That's possible? They go, it's not great, but it's totally possible. And they go, but how do we know it works? How do we know? So it's the connections. We're finding that the connections, the human element, how do we make this work in a way that humans will use it? This is my mom, so I have a very, very personal kind of connection to the aging. She lives with me. So that's her on her smart bike, because she can't get out of her neighborhood because there's a big hill. So once you get off your smart bike, once you get on your electric bike, you can get out of the neighborhood and then you can go have fun. But we're aging. But I think the thing that for me is important when I think about mobility transportation for an older community is when you look at adults that aren't in nursing homes, which I think one of the things we're thinking about is how do you not have people in nursing homes, but for those that aren't in nursing homes, 50% report some kind of disability. And remember, hearing is huge. That's the disability that nobody wants to talk about. And it's critical to how do you think about it, how do you do these things. But we also know that disabilities increase with age. There are natural age-related changes in vision and hearing, but there's also things that gait and other things that tend to change with age that cause issues. We talk about this in our report as aging in place. It turns out the majority of adults want to basically live in their home until they die. They don't want to go to a nursing home. Actually, if you look at the data on adult costs, many adults lose their whole savings in the last 2 years of their lives because of these costs in hospital and nursing homes. And you know, they want to be able to live in their own place. They want to be able to die in their own, maybe you don't want to die in your home, but you know what I mean. So, but you know, there's problems. When you think about aging in place, when you think about all sorts of things, you have to have people in homes that make sense, right? I lived in a house when my mom moved in that had an incredibly steep stairs. It's standard DC home. By the way, I fell down those stairs. She never did. But a standard DC home with, you know, from 100 years ago. Stairs are steep. All the bedrooms are on the second floor. We now live in a house with an elevator. It's a very different world when you're aging, and when she's had both knees replaced, it works a whole lot better. So, but you think about falls increase with age. Seniors are much more likely, by the time you get to 85, you're much more likely to fall and get hurt. So how do we think about it? I love this picture. I have no idea why this picture exists, but I love this picture. Mobility is critical, though. If you think about it, mobility in the home, mobility in the community. We really think about it as moving safely and reliably through the community. But older adults are consistently, all the studies suggest that they're less able to be mobile in their homes, in the community, and that impacts how they interact with their environment, but also how they use transportation. I live in DC, or I lived in DC till recently. When it would snow, which now is a thing in DC, we have snow, but before it was easier. But we now have snow, and then my older neighbors who have to get on a subway, get on a bus, you push the snow out of the street, and then all those little things that you can go down to get unimpeded access to cross the street are gone. What do? You gotta pick your feet up way up high, balance on one leg, and get through that snow. Not really good if you're worried about your gait and your balance and all that. And that's all with cars whipping along. So, but in order to, we have to be thinking about mobility. We have to be thinking about this. I'm thrilled with this RCN because I think these are the questions in mobility and transportation, is how do we help people get around? And when you think about it, how do we design and develop systems that are going to work for older adults? Before we were talking, you know, how do we, these are some of the ideas that we've had, you know, how do we develop affordable rehabilitation devices that help people move not only in their home but also in the community? We've not done this. We generally design, I run Smart Connected Health. Everybody wants to build me an exoskeleton for your spinal cord injury. I got it. It's a lot of money there. It's really cool and you're gonna feel good. But you know what? What about an exoskeleton for those who really cannot walk to the bus or to the car because they're wobbly, because their balance is off, because of all sorts of issues that might happen? Can I have a lightweight one? Can I have one that's easy to get into? Can I have one that probably doesn't cost $15,000? Can I have one that's also insurance reimbursable? Thinking about that, you know, that was funny. But think about the robotic technologies. I think I work on our National Robotics Initiative too. It's amazing how little time we spend talking to people about robots. Robots are existing all over the place now. Human-robotic interaction has become a thing, and I'm thrilled. But how do we talk to older adults about a robot? If there's going to be a robot in your home, somebody told me they wanted to put a robot in a hospital so that they could talk to older adults about their visits, and I thought, oh yeah, I mean, there's a HIPAA issue about privacy, first off, you're talking to this robot, but who wants to talk to a robot when there's all those humans around, right? It doesn't make sense, so we need this. We need trials on this. We need to think about effectiveness. We need to think of how this works so we can get paid. We need to diversify our technologies. One of the things we found is every technology was for a single thing. That's not going to work when we roll out things into a community. How do we do that? And thinking about smart homes, there was a discussion about these smart hubs. Smart homes are real. Builders are building these smart home communities all over the place, whether they're telling you or not. I know in California you have so many sensors for earthquakes that are used for fall detection, that can use for, there's amazing things you can use it, but we got to work together to know the right questions. And there's no consent on any of that data. So, but how do we think about that? How do we help people? We had a meeting, and I'll talk about it at the end, we had a meeting 2 years ago that NIH, NSF, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and a bunch of others came together to talk about how do you age in place. And one of the things that came up again and again was like, how do you deal with making data useful to older adults so that they do consent, so that they are willing to share data, so that you can be honest about what you're collecting, but it's useful. Because what came out very clearly was if you were spying on people to tell their children, look, you're not doing so well, that didn't fly. But what really was helpful was when you were telling people, it seems like your balance is not quite right. Let's work on exercises to do that. It was a very different way to think about the world. When we think about movement in the community, for transportation, for older adults, these make huge impacts. Limited walking ability, if you think about stair climbing ability, you wouldn't believe how many places that you need a stair. I live in DC. The elevator out notices are almost the longest thing ever on our transit apps because most of them don't work on a daily basis. Wheelchair use. When you think about mobility, you need vehicles that can accept wheelchairs, and they need to accept them quickly. If you've ever watched a wheelchair go onto a bus, it's like a huge process, and it changes the bus schedule. So how do we think about that? How do we incorporate that into our thinking and our technology? Visual limitations. I think it's great wayfinding around visual limitations because we're all struggling with visual limitations, and the older we get, the more we are. Hearing limitations. Hearing is a huge issue, and by the time you get to 65, the majority of people have some or more hearing loss. So how do you hear those cues? You're walking in New York City, and you can hear that beeping, buzzing, it's beep, 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 beep. Can you hear it? Probably not. Maybe not. Do you know what it is? I'm always wondering what those noises are supposed to tell me. So, and then cognitive limitations. Don't realize that once you hit, 70? A large segment of the population will have some cognitive change. So you may not be making the same decisions. So if you think about public transportation, we did a pretty exhaustive review around older adults, and it appears that access was a huge issue. So getting on these systems, timing of these systems. How do you think about time? How do you think about taxis and ride shares in areas of the country that are not New York City? It's kind of amazing now. I live in Northern Virginia. Getting an Uber in my neighborhood is still a challenge. I can get one, but I gotta wait 7 or 8 minutes. So if you have to plan, I just think my mother, when she says, I'm gonna take an Uber to the airport because you're working. She leaves 3 hours early. 3 hours before she thinks she has to be at the airport, by the way. So that's like 5 hours early. But it's 3 hours because the Uber might be delayed or something might happen. When you think about that, that's just you have to do that frequently. She's lost her whole day. I don't let her do that. I drive her because it seems like an absolute waste of time. Control. When you're an older adult, you want to know what's happening and when. We all want to know what's happening and when. Many of the user interfaces are not designed for us to figure out where we're going and when. So how do we do user interfaces? Uber is a software company more than anything, right? But when you think about that app's designed for you and I. It's not designed for an older adult who is not technologically savvy. You have all these little things happening, you have times changing, you have all sorts of things happening. And then confidence. I think when we talk about this all the time in the world of universal design, but we need technology that makes older adults feel confident in using it. We were talking about this before, and I don't even know what Amazon made an Amazon Senior tablet at one point. And it was interesting, they did tons of user work on it, and the big thing, it had less apps, less garbage, but it had a human. It had a little button with a human in the corner. And because all their people said, we just want to get a human if it doesn't work. And it turns out, the last time I talked to somebody, it was people didn't use the human often, but when they did, it could solve the problem right away. So think about an interface that supports the way humans interact and teaches them. So I mean, we need systems that deal with wheelchairs. Scooters are becoming prevalent. How do we think about scooters when we're talking about transportation for older adults? Think about wayfinding. I think it's visually impaired, but how do we set up wayfinding systems that let people know what's happening in real time so they feel control, so they feel confident? It's not enough that the Uber's going to show. There's some level of confidence that you got to believe that sharing will come up, and you won't have to spend your whole day negotiating it. Develop assistance strategies in some places where you're going to need it. Can we do robotic things? Can we do things that will help people? I think sharing in neighborhoods, one of the questions that we had, and the Department of Transportation is looking at, can you do ride shares in very small vehicles around neighborhoods? Right? Do you really need to have a full-fledged ride-sharing system? Can you do small ride-sharing systems? And really think about the privacy issues. Think about the policy issues here. How do we build systems that are going to make people feel comfortable? You know, I mean, we think about privacy and security, but this morning my husband texted me and said, "You're in New York? I didn't know you were in New York today." I know that says something about my marriage, but he knew I was on the road. But it was so funny. But it's so funny because Google's sending him information, because we share an email, right? They're sending him temperature and traffic information for Long Island. And I'm from Long Island, so you know, he's like, "I didn't know you were on Long Island. I didn't know you were in New York today. Are you seeing friends?" You know, but it was funny because I thought, you know, that's such a privacy violation, right? If you think about it, Google's knows more about me. It's a problem. How do we think about that? How do we negotiate policies around that? I'm not saying they're using it to ill will, and I'm not slamming Google. I'm just saying it's an incredible amount of information. And don't think they don't know. I grew up, 10 miles from here, so, because that's a public record too. So, I mean, I just wanted, in our meeting on Aging in Place, we really talked about thinking, as you're thinking about these systems for older adult, personalization, adaptation. Don't think, we need to think about universal design, we need to work on that, but we need to allow things to be personalized and adapted. We need to let people own these things, and I think we really don't understand exactly how to do that yet. Think about future-proofing them. What's going to happen a year from now? What's going to happen 5 years from now? Right now, we have a ton of apps, but they don't last long. And so if an older adult learns to use it, it's a new one next year. How do we future-proof things? How do we help think about that? How do we collect the right kind of evidence? I live in this intersection between humans and technology. You go to the NIH and you ask about evidence. You go to the Center for Medicare or Medicaid Services and ask about evidence. Boy, there's standards. What is it when you're thinking about it in the technology world? I want to innovate. I want to do things fast. I want to make things smart. My colleagues say, I want to make sure it's safe. I want to make sure it's reliable. I want to make sure it's understandable. I want to make sure. We have to get these things aligned. And we have to come up with new systems for analyzing it. Not only do we need new systems for analyzing computer vision in real time, but we need to understand what's enough and when is it enough and how do we work on that. And that's a technology problem, but we need humans to help us understand that. And we need to change culture. I can't tell you how many meetings I go to where it's either all geriatric and community people or it's all technology people. I'm thrilled that this meeting is not that. But I can't tell you how many times I walk into a room and I'm the only person representing computing. And there's maybe an engineer in the room with me, and we're kind of trying to, and they're going, shut up, just be quiet, shut up, be quiet. You don't know anything. We know a lot of things, but we don't know the same things as others know. So we need to work together. And we'll actually do a whole lot more, because I was in NIH, and I found out things were too slow and too stuck. I went to NSF so that we could start to unstick things. And this RCN is unsticking. So that's it for me.
Any questions? Any questions?
Thank you. Hi, Wendy. I'm Virginia Dawes with the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. And let me say, first of all, thank you. You really get it. As somebody who spent my career in aging, I really, really appreciate this presentation. And the only thing I would add is the importance of recognizing the generations within the older population. Somebody who's 60 or 65 is not the same as somebody who's 85, who's likely to be the parent of that 60-year-old. And the willingness and openness to adaptation in technology, I think we are going to see a sea change in the very near future. So thank you.
I will add that my mother is going to be 79. She's a very proud owner of the iWatch 3 and the iPad. No endorsements there, but but there's a whole sea change coming because she lives with me, and you get forced into technology in my world. But she still can't work the smart TV though. So I mean, you think about this. So I think.
I want to start by saying thank you, because I sat here shaking my head yes a lot. But one of the biggest things that you bring up is the researcher side, the NIH kind of researcher, the technology side, and also the private corporations. And different people want to work at different speeds. So how do you bring them together to have a dialogue? Because I think that's missing. NSF, NIH, they're trying to bring them together to submit grants, but the discussions on what's rapid, what's too rapid, and what's okay, we're going to translate into practice and then a whoops, versus we've got too much data and it's 6 years out and now the technology's dead.
So I think this is a great point. I mean, I think we're talking to industry all the time. You saw in the first presentation, industry is involved. But I also think, I just gave a presentation around user-centered design, and IBM is there, and they're investing a huge amount in user-centered design. I talked to Microsoft, they have the same thing. If you look at the aging chart, you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to realize that there's a whole market, that if you're in technology, there's a market there. And that we just have to have them convinced that there is the market. I mean, one of the things we've been talking about is there a market for this? And it's funny, when you listen to the building community, they get it. See, look, there we have wayfinding going on there. But the thing is that, I think industry is starting to understand that there's a market there, but I think we all need to come together to put the policies into place that help those markets, that help develop those markets in a way that makes sense.
There was somebody question. I'm just going to say thank you.
Well, thank you. All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay.